Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping headfirst into the really fascinating world of Indian temples.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. I mean, these aren't just buildings for worship, are they? They're like living history books, incredible pieces of architecture, and, the heart of so many communities all across India.
Absolutely. From the Himalayas right down to the southern tip, thousands of them.
Exactly. And with so many, each with its own story, well, our mission here is to kind of distill the key insights. We want to get to the heart of what makes these structures so important to the Indian civilization.
Kind of a shortcut to understanding their impact.
Yeah, exactly. So if you stick with us, you'll hopefully get a much richer sense of the spirituality, the art, the social traditions, everything that's wrapped up in India's temple heritage.
Sounds like a plan. And, one of the first things you notice is just how ancient this tradition is.
Right. It goes way back.
Way back, even before the big stone temples we usually picture. It's fascinating to trace it from the Vedic period. Back then, it was more about open-air rituals.
Like the fire altars, yajnas.
Precisely, the yajnas. Sacred fire altars were central. Then gradually you see the shift towards Murti Puja.
Idol worship.
Worship of sacred images, yeah. And with that came the need for dedicated spaces, for temples, places where people could, have a tangible connection, experience the divine.
Okay, so that evolution from open air to, dedicated buildings.
Yeah.
How did that actually happen? What drove that change?
Well, a lot of it had to do with key dynasties, ruling powers. They were hugely influential.
Okay.
So you have the Gupta period, maybe 4th to 6th century CE. That's when we really see structural temples taking off, especially in North India.
Ah, so that's a key starting point for actual building.
A major one, yes. Then if you look south, dynasties like the Cholas, the Pallavas, the Hoysalas, they took temple architecture to just incredible heights.
That's where we get the big, towering South Indian style.
Exactly. The Dravidian style with the huge towers, the super intricate carvings, just breathtaking stuff.
Wow.
But it's also important to remember the resilience here. Temple culture went through a lot. Mughal rule, the colonial period. There were times of destruction, definitely.
Oh, you're right about that.
But the core spiritual and cultural importance, it just endured. It persevered through all that.
That resilience is amazing. And thinking about that timeline, the sheer variety that popped up, it's mind-boggling. Let's talk about those architectural styles. You mentioned North Indian Nagar and South Indian Dravidian. Can you kind of paint a picture of the differences?
Sure. So the North Indian style, the Nagara style, the most distinctive feature is probably the tower, the shikara. It's often described as a sort of beehive-shaped.
Right, I can picture that, curving inwards towards the top.
Exactly. And that rises directly over the main shrine, the Garbhagriha. That's the heart of the temple where the main deity resides.
The inner sanctum.
The inner sanctum, yes. And usually you'll have a mandapa, which is a pillared hall, kind of an entrance area or gathering space.
Okay. Any famous examples that really show that Nagar style?
Oh, definitely. Think of the Khajuraho temples. They're famous for those clusters of shikaras. Or Kashi Vishwanath in Varanasi, incredibly sacred. And the Sun Temple at Modhera in Gujarat is another fantastic example. It even has this amazing stepwell.
Wow. Those shikaras really do define the look, don't they? So how is the Dravidian style down south different, visually, structurally?
Very different visually. Instead of that single curving shikara, the hallmark of the Dravidian style is the gopuram. These massive pyramid-shaped gateway towers.
Ah, the gateways.
Yeah.
Often super colorful and covered in statues.
Exactly. Intricately decorated, often telling mythological stories. And the temple complexes themselves tend to be huge, often enclosed by high walls, like a whole sacred city sometimes. And inside, you find these elaborate pillared halls, multiple shrines. It's a whole environment.
Can you give us some big names for the Dravidian style?
Sure. The Meenakshi Temple in Madurai is iconic, with its multiple towering gopurams. Then there's the Brihadiswara Temple in Thanjavur that has this enormous tower, the Vimana, over the main sanctum. And Sri Ranganatha Swami in Srirangam. It's one of the largest functioning temple complexes in the world. Just vast.
It's hard to even imagine the scale sometimes. Okay, so we have Nagara in the north, Dravidian in the south. But wasn't there a sort of blend, too? The Visara style?
Yes, exactly. Visara is fascinating. It flourished particularly in the Deccan region, like in Karnataka. And it really is a hybrid, a mix of Nagara and Dravidian features.
So what would that look like?
Well, you might see a tower that's kind of like a shikara, but maybe more stepped or tiered, not quite the smooth curve. But then you'll also see the really detailed, intricate carvings that you often associate more with the southern style.
Interesting combination. Is there a key example?
The Hoysalswara Temple at Halebidu in Karnataka is probably the classic example. It really showcases that beautiful synthesis of the two traditions.
Incredible artistry. But beyond the stone and the structure, what really gets me is the life around these temples. It's not just architecture, it's a living culture, isn't it? Woven into daily life.
Oh, absolutely. That's crucial. The daily rituals are a huge part of it. And these aren't just random. They're often meticulously guided by ancient scriptures called the agamas.
The gamas, what do they cover?
Pretty much everything.
Yeah.
From how a temple should be built to the precise way worship should be conducted, the timings, the offerings, the chants.
So very structured.
Very. In the major temples, you'll see multiple pujas, acts of worship throughout the day. There's the arti, the waving of lamps, abhishekams, which is the ritual bathing of the deity.
Right.
And then, of course, the distribution of prasadam.
Ah, the blessed food offering.
Exactly. Considered sacred, imbued with the deity's grace, and shared among the devotees. Well, the scale of these daily practices and the devotion involved is really quite something.
And that's just the daily rhythm. Then you have the festivals, these huge events that must just transform the atmosphere.
Oh, completely. Festivals are massive. Think about the Kumbh Mela, arguably the largest religious gathering on Earth.
Millions of people.
Millions. Or the Rath Yatra in Puri, with those gigantic chariots being pulled through the streets, Navaratri celebrating the goddess, Vaikunta Ekadashi for Vishnu. These are events on an immense scale, drawing unbelievable crowds, all focused on that shared devotion.
It really underscores how these temples were and still are so much more than just places for prayer. They seem to have been real centers for, well, everything.
They absolutely were. Historically, they were vital hubs for learning for the arts, classical music, dance forms like Bharatanatyam. So much of that was nurtured in temple environments.
Really? Like dance performances as part of temple life?
Oh, yes. And literature, too. They were also educational centers teaching Vedic knowledge, astrology, philosophy, and don't forget the charitable aspect. Annadanam, the practice of offering free food, was and often still is a major function, providing water, sometimes shelter. Temples often took care of the needy. You might even find traditions of the guru-shishya relationship, knowledge being passed down within the temple precinct.
So they really were the heart of the community. Almost like the town square, the university, the concert hall, and the social safety net all rolled into one. I've even heard stories about disputes being settled there.
That's a great way to put it. They hosted fairs, which were huge social and economic events. Marriages often happened there. They played this indispensable role in knitting the community together, fostering social harmony.
Building that sense of shared identity.
Exactly. And nurturing bhakti, that deep personal devotion across all levels of society. Sometimes even things like managing shared village resources were linked to the temple.
It's just remarkable how central they were. And, what's striking is how much of that significance carries through to today, even in our super modern world.
It really does. Temples continue to inspire incredible devotion. They're still centers for charity and philanthropy.
And pilgrimage is still huge, right?
Absolutely massive. These pilgrimage sites support entire local economies. They drive tourism, which in turn helps fund cultural preservation efforts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we're also seeing this growth in spiritual tourism or wellness travel focused around temple towns. People going for yoga, meditation, seeking that sense of peace.
That connection makes total sense.
Yeah.
Which brings us neatly to those pilgrimage circuits you mentioned. It sounds like this amazing sacred map laid over the country.
It really is like a network. These circuits are incredibly important routes for devotees. You have the Chardam, for instance.
Yeah, four corners.
Right, Badrinath up north, Dwarka out west, Puri in the east, and Ramaswaram down south.
Oh.
A hugely significant pilgrimage for many Hindus.
Wow. What else?
Then there are the 12 Jyotirlingas, considered the most sacred sites for Lord Shiva, spread all across India. The Shakti Pithas, dedicated to the goddess Shakti, are also incredibly powerful centers.
So these are the major pan-Indian ones.
Generally, yes. But then you have loads of important regional circuits too, like the Pancharama temples in Andhra Pradesh or the Ashtavinayak temples for Ganesha in Maharashtra, Navagraha temples for the planets, the Divya Desams, which are Vishnu temples mentioned in Tamil texts. The list goes on.
It paints this picture of just layers upon layers of sacred geography, an incredibly rich tapestry. And for the individual making that journey, or even just visiting their local temple down the street, it's obviously a very personal thing.
Oh, deeply personal. For millions, visiting a temple is about seeking blessings, finding some inner peace, maybe solace, or just feeling that connection to something bigger.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a massive, famous temple. A small, humble village shrine can hold just as much meaning, just as much emotional resonance for the people who worship there. You hear so many personal stories about finding comfort or guidance in these spaces.
So, as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we barely scratched the surface, but it's so clear. These aren't just buildings. They're like living embodiments of India's spirit, aren't they?
I think that's a perfect way to say it.
All that history, the art, the philosophy, the devotion, it's all there, woven into daily life for centuries.
It truly is. The whole temple culture is just, it's profoundly embedded in India's heritage and, the consciousness of its people.
Yeah. Well, here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. In a world that's changing so fast, becoming more modern, more globalized, how did these ancient spaces manage to stay so relevant, so meaningful to so many people?
That's a deep question.
It is. What does their enduring power tell us about ourselves? About that fundamental human need for connection, for meaning, maybe for something sacred in our lives?
Yeah.
Definitely something worth thinking about. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.